Okay guys, so welcome again to the Anvil. Today we're going to be topping off the Nutritional Pyramid series with the final piece of the puzzle, which is supplementation. Okay, now the reason it's important to break down supplementation but also cover it last is it's where most people go to first. Now, what is a supplement? Simple, the clue is kind of in the name. It's something that you add into your diet to supplement the things that you already eat, to address one of the problems that you may or may not experience throughout the course of the other aspects of the nutritional pyramid. So let's say, for example, in a macronutrient ratio standpoint, either from a logistical standpoint, appetite, doesn't really matter, obviously that's down to you as an individual, but let's say you struggle to get in the requirements from a protein side of things. One of the most commonly used supplements, and probably the most abundant one that you will find, is things like whey protein that people tend to ingest and take in mixed with either water or milk just to try and top up their overall protein content. However, supplements don't just exist within the realm of protein or macronutrients, they also take into account the whole sphere when it comes to things like micronutrients, vitamins and so on, as we spoke about in the last episode. So, as you can see here, we use what's known as the steaks versus shakes principle, particularly when it comes to whey protein. We'll cover the other supplements towards the end of the talk, but particularly when it comes to protein. As a general rule of thumb, you shouldn't be taking in the majority of your protein intake from supplementation, okay? So let's say you have 4 meals throughout the day, so breakfast, lunch, snacks, and obviously tea. If you find that you're only taking in that 20 to 40 gram of protein content that we talked about in the macronutrient talk, if you're only finding that you're getting that in within 2 meals of the day and the other 2 you're having to supplement, there's something that you've got to try and work to find a balance there to go back to having normal holistic food and meals that are balanced, because we tend to see that when people take in the majority of their content from a protein standpoint from supplementation, they suffer with the micronutrient side of things. As we talked about last time, it's things like carrier molecules and bioavailability that actually have a huge impact on your overall health. Like I said, we tend to use it's just a catch line for steaks versus shakes. As a general rule of thumb, unless you are a pro bodybuilder or you're a strongman or you're a weightlifter that's getting up towards that upper echelon of your performance, you shouldn't really be taking in more than 2 shakes a day. And even then, I would argue that some of the more elite athletes would actually get the majority of their content from holistic meals. So again, just to reiterate, when it comes to supplementation, the bioavailability and also the amino acid profile that we touched on briefly within the discussion about vegetarian-based protein sources, you just need to make sure that within supplementation, if you are taking in supplements, that you look on a little bit of a deeper level to make sure you're getting the complete amino acid profile. Now, things like whey protein, casein protein, they tend to cover all the bases anyway. But as I said, you want to try and find the balance between whey protein, for example, is a dairy-based protein. So if that is where you're getting the protein from a supplementation standpoint, you then don't want to rely on dairy within your holistic meals to get your protein, if that makes sense. So you don't want to have whey protein and then also have feta cheese as your bulk protein source within a certain meal. Okay, you want to try and find the balance across the different spectrum of amino acid profiles that are available. So with supplementation, one of the things that we have to touch on is this notion between the 3 differing types of evidence that we can use within any kind of science, but particularly within the training world, which is theoretical, anecdotal, and empirical. Now, theoretical evidence is something that forms the basis for hypotheses that we test within empirical research. Empirical research is simply just the things that we do within the lab. So, you know, the typical view of science that we have nowadays, which is where we control all the variables, try and find one that we can isolate and see its effect on the human body. Now, the difficulty is with relying holistically on empirical evidence, particularly within the realm of nutrition, is the body's what's called an open system. It's not as simple as A plus B equals C. There's so many different variables going on within the amount of bodily systems that we have, not to mention the inter-individual differences between each person, that we can't necessarily pinpoint it relying holistically on empirical evidence, which means we fall back on anecdotal work as well. Now, anecdotal is just experiences taken from other people, and you can't really dismiss that necessarily. Although a lot of people, we kind of went through a wave and we're coming back to it now anyway, a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon of empirical research being the only thing that mattered until we realised, well, hang on a minute, some of the research suggests that that supplement might not work within a particular cohort, yet when you look at the bros, so to speak, that are in the gym and that are slamming protein shakes 30 minutes post-workout, they seem to be pretty big, strong, and seem to be doing pretty well. You can't then dismiss that based purely off 1 or even 10 research papers necessarily, okay? Because ultimately the only thing that matters is the experience that you have. So it's about trying to find the balance between the two. And that leads me on to my next thing, which is the world's strongest drug. Irrespective of what you're trying to gain, whether it's trying to be bigger, stronger, faster, whether you're trying to cure illness, whether you are, you know, working towards being smarter, so it's a cognitive supplement, the world's strongest thing is the placebo effect. Now, if you're not familiar with what the placebo effect is, it's basically your belief in something that it will work actually has what's known as psychosomatic influence on your body. So your mindset will influence your direct physiology. So there's been studies, particularly we keep it within the scope of training. There's been studies with performance enhancing drugs, so things like anabolic steroids, that have been given, actually prescribed to someone, or rather one particular cohort. So group A, let's say, group B had placebo steroids, so they were told that they were on anabolic steroids but weren't, and then group C, which were told that it wasn't steroids, they were just given a sugar pill as well. And group A and group B progressed at a very similar rate, even though one of the groups weren't actually taking the performance enhancing drugs. Then when they informed the participants that they weren't taking the drugs, their strength actually decreased because they lost that placebo effect, so it didn't actually allow them to retain the gains. So the key is your belief within that particular supplement also has a direct effect on its overall potency in terms of the result that you're after, which leads me on to what we know and the kind of ambiguity in the world of fitness. Now, to put it simply, talking about the open system that the body is, it's very difficult for any fitness professional to sell a particular training program. They'll try, but they are aware, as is most people are starting to become aware of it now. When we talked about the laws of training, the individuality is something that has to come into play, which means we can't package a certain training program that's the same for everyone. However, supplementation, if you get the buy-in from people and you make individuals believe, not from a manipulative standpoint, but just purely by providing, a lot of the times within the evidence-based community, by providing the empirical evidence that's there, if you get people to believe in that a supplement that will work, a lot of the time the placebo effect takes care of it. Now, that's not to say that every supplement that works is purely down to the placebo effect. Absolutely not. The difference is it's much easier to package, which is why when you Google supplements, there is an endless list of different things and different derivatives of certain supplements that are the new best, biggest thing, because ultimately it's something that can be tweaked and, adjusted on a micro level to create this whole new compound that will give you the best gains in the world. Whereas ultimately, like we've talked about throughout the course of this whole nutritional pyramid, it's about trying to find the balance across things like calorie intake, macronutrient ratio, and so on, as well as things like stress management before we tackle the supplementation side of things. So, going on to what we know. So what we know, particularly within the world of strength, getting stronger, what we know actually has a beneficial effect, and we'll touch briefly on the things that people talk about but they're not necessarily worth your time. So what we know is creatine. Number one, phosphocreatine. We have 3 different energy systems within the body. So we have and we'll touch on this in a later episode within the Anvil, but we have the ATP-PC system, we have the lactic acid-based energy system, and we have the aerobic energy system. The creatine side of things, the ATP-PC system is your overall power output. So it's when we do a deadlift 1RM or something like that, it's the ability to transfer maximal power into a movement. It's typically the energy system that's tapped out the most in things like maximal effort sprints as well. Now, creatine, within the human body, we do synthesize our own creatine from the foods that we ingest. However, we typically only, now these aren't the exact numbers, so don't quote me on it, but we typically only synthesize about 80%, which means there's a small amount left over that we would need to access from high dosages within certain foods. So certain foods like steak, for example, eggs and so on, they tend to have a higher quantity of phosphocreatine within them. But from a supplementation standpoint, there is an endless amount of research. I think of seen just from the latest kind of research review, there's over 3,000 papers now that are showing the efficacy of phosphocreatine, not only within increased power output, but improving body composition. It allows you to run faster, jump higher, lift more weight, do more reps at a given weight. There's even some research to suggest that it has what's known as a neuroprotective effect. So it elevates or rather increases the rate at which you recover from maximal effort workouts. We then also have, so creatine's absolutely number one. There are two different types of people that aren't taking creatine that should, and people that are taking creatine. So the next one is beta-alanine. Now, again, this isn't necessarily studied as much as other things like creatine, but we do know that it does have some beneficial effects. However, there is a large inter-individual difference. So beta-alanine, basically going on to the other energy systems, so the lactic acid and the aerobic energy system. The lactic acid energy system, the byproduct of the anaerobic glycolysis, so the breakdown of glycogen in the absence of oxygen, is the production of lactic acid. And that is the thing, once it hits what's known as lactate threshold within your bloodstream, you physically cannot continue. Like, it doesn't matter about willpower or anything like that, maybe with the exception of a select few. It's purely once you hit that lactate threshold, the inhibitory reflex from the body is to shut everything down. It typically occurs in people vomiting. That's one of the reasons why people are sick when they do certain kind of HIIT workouts and that type of thing. So beta-alanine works to try and suppress the lactate threshold buildup. It's known as a lactate buffer. And it has been shown, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest it as well. The rugby lads that I used to work with, they all used to use it at quite high dosage as well. I've used it myself, and it does actually have a very significant beneficial effect. The only difference with it is, from a side effect standpoint, you can actually get what's known as the tingles, because it's suppressing or it's acting as a lactate buffer. You sometimes get a little bit of tingling in your skin, which can freak some people out. A couple of the rugby lads, even though they were tough, they didn't even want to take it purely because of this. It's down to you as an individual, but it is beneficial. You just need to be aware of that side effect. Just before we continue as well, with regards to creatine, the side effects that people tend to experience with that is things like indigestion. It can cause cramps within certain muscles as well. From a dosaging standpoint, with creatine, a lot of the supplement companies will tell you, they've started to back off it now, but a lot of the supplement companies will tell you that you need to do through a loading phase where you take 5 grams, for a certain number of days, and then you gradually work down to a maintenance phase. You don't need to do that. If you do that, the rate at which you change from not taking it to taking it is the increased likelihood that you're going to get side effects. And it's the same with beta-alanine as well. If you go from never taking it to slamming it every single day, you're probably going to get that tingling a little bit more than if you would gradually bring it into your overall nutritional protocol. Whey protein, we know that works. As we said, to be honest with you, with whey protein, I don't even class it as a supplement necessarily in terms of the additive effects. It's purely just topping up your macronutrients. As long as you follow the steaks versus shakes principles, you're fine. Each scoop, depending on which company you buy it from, each scoop tends to have 20 to 30 grams of protein. Again, just be wary that if you are mixing that with milk, it will increase your overall sugar intake, because milk obviously has a lot of sugar in it. So just bear that in mind. A lot of people just think, oh, well, it's just a protein shake, and if they're not tracking their individual macros, they actually forget that that's one of the things sometimes that can contribute to their overall increased caloric intake. And then micronutrients, we touched on it briefly last time, but a couple of the different supplements that I need to stress 100% work. Again, I'm not actually advising that you take them, but they do definitely work. The research is all there. Omega-3 fish oil tablets, I swear there's a new research paper every single day on that, about it having some beneficial effect to some area of the body. It can improve cognitive function, it can improve sleep quality, it can elevate your metabolism, it can improve strength. There's so many correlations there that it's worth bearing in mind. Vitamin D supplementation, as I said on the last talk, if you aren't exposing 60% of your skin to the sun for a minimum of 3 to 4 hours a day, you're not going to be fully tapping out those vitamin D levels. So it's worth bearing in mind that you probably need some vitamin D supplementation as well. Vitamin C is beneficial, vitamin B12, all these different micronutrient supplementation kind of things that you can buy, they're all beneficial. You just need to bear in mind, like I said, bioavailability, making sure that you're tapping out the other principles first, like the 5-color principle, the steaks versus shakes principle, and so on. Now, just the last thing that we're going to touch on is the supplements that people say work, but they the research is kind of ambiguous and I wouldn't necessarily recommend to get them. First one is BCAA, so branched chain amino acids. In the fitness community, there is a huge amount of debate about this as to whether or not they're beneficial. The more credible sources that I tend to derive a lot of information from seem to think that it isn't beneficial, that there's no additive effects to taking them. There has been some research to suggest that it reduces the breakdown of muscle tissue if you take them intra-workout. So as you are training, if you're drinking them, it will prevent the breakdown or significant breakdown of muscle tissue, and therefore allow you to do more reps, more sets within the given training session. Personally, I don't buy it. Purely from a standpoint of the cost to benefit ratio is so low relative to these ones that I've listed here that it's just not worth it. And you fly through them with the amount of dosage that you have to have. They don't last very long, so it means you're topping them up. And sometimes a 500 gram bag of BCAAs is the same cost as a 2.5 kilo bag of whey protein, even though branched chain amino acids are the same thing as the whey protein. They're just already digested for you. So I would steer clear of BCAAs personally. If you have the money, go for it. That's absolutely fine. Next one is the derivatives of whey protein, like isolate, and I can't remember all the fancy names now. Again, the increase in price there because they've removed certain compounds and refined it. Personally, I don't think is beneficial. I think just going with a standard whey protein or casein protein is the most beneficial way to go. There's nothing in the specialist proteins in terms of the increase in cost that actually warrants how much you're going to be spending. And then finally, pre-workouts. Now, I will separate this slightly into two different kind of points. First of all, stimulants from a supplementation standpoint are always going to be beneficial, but I don't actually include them within supplements because a supplement is the notion of you adding it to your diet to improve your overall health and performance. It's less of a supplement as a pre-workout, and it's more just a training aid. So it would actually fall into the concept of ergogenic aids. With this, you're looking more from a standpoint of what compounds are within the pre-workout. So caffeine is unbelievably potent. It's the research. I don't have to tell you that a morning cup of coffee actually elevates your energy levels and everything like that. However, there's one thing you need to be wary of with pre-workouts. First of all, the supplements that, or rather the compounds that are within the supplement, aren't necessarily just caffeine. Up until recently, there's a couple of compounds that had things like ephedrine in, which is now an illegal stimulant, and a couple of more potent things that actually give the increased energy levels that you get versus potential side effects aren't worth it. To add to that, even if you are taking a supplement that is just high caffeine levels and you're just using it to get a buzz, the caffeine is fundamentally a poison, not to try and scare people, but it is, and that elevated kind of energy levels that we get is the body trying to respond to that. However, there is a very, very big dulling effect with caffeine in which your body actually becomes used to it very, very quickly. So people that tend to slam coffee and all this type of stuff, I used to be that person, still am in some ways. Just to increase your energy levels, you're actually in what's called a negative loop where your body becomes reliant on the caffeine. If you don't take the caffeine in, you feel really, really drowsy. So then you think, oh, well, I need caffeine to elevate my energy levels. Whereas most of the time, it's just down to things like hydration that we tend to be missing, which is a separate talk entirely. So yeah, it's just bearing in mind that with pre-workouts, look at the individual compounds that are within them before you take them, and bear in mind that there's a big dulling effect. So if you're having to take it every single training session, it's no different than not taking it. You'll think that you're getting a buzz, but you're spending a lot of money. And to be honest with you, if you are a competitive athlete and you don't have access to the pre-workout, it's not a good situation to be in if you become reliant on those types of things. So that's pretty much it for the supplementation side of things. They're the ones that I kind of cover in a little bit more depth. Just to reiterate, I don't prescribe any of these. This is just purely advice in terms of what the individual knowledge is around each supplement and how I think it fits into the overall view of strength.